We are familiar with stories of great rescues. Some years ago, a group of miners in South America were trapped in a deep mine, and they had to be rescued by sinking another mine shaft in just the right position. More recently, a group of young footballers were trapped in a cave in Thailand, and an international mission was mounted to rescue them. Sadly, one person lost his life during the course of the rescue. Occasionally, you hear of an armed mission to free hostages taken by terrorists. Often, rescuers take great risks, and sometimes they perish. Our reading described how Abraham and his relatively small group of men overtook a sizable and victorious army to rescue Lot. Lot appeared to be a hapless victim of power politics, but he had also allowed himself to be drawn into the life of the wicked city of Sodom. As Joel reminded us last week, after Lot separated from Abram, he started to live near Sodom. But when he was captured by the army of Chedorlaomer, he was actually living in Sodom. A very dangerous place for him spiritually. The Apostle Peter, in 2 Peter chapter 2, described Lot as being a righteous man, distressed by the depraved conduct of the lawless citizens of Sodom. Surprisingly, he'd been drawn to a place that was to be a snare for him. In chapter 19, we shall see how reluctant he was to leave the place which was to experience the judgment of God. His experience is mirrored in many believers who keep one foot in the world. Perhaps you're like that. Lot needed to be rescued from Sodom, but it needed an intervention from an even higher throne than that of Chedorlaomer. Abram might seem to be the hero of chapter 14, but as the chapter unfolds, Abram recognized someone much greater than himself that was involved in the rescue. Chapter 14 describes the wars between powerful kings, but it's actually about God Most High. It's about him delivering Lot in the midst of a wicked world dominated by evil power lords. Sadly, lust for power and influence frequently leads to war. Often wars are being caused by greed, but sometimes war is caused by men who just wanted to control the consciences and the minds of others. It's not just the rulers of nations that abuse their power. You can see power politics in the boardroom of companies, council chambers, and families. Of course, it's true that unsatisfied ambition for more and more wealth is a cause of fighting. Chedorlaomer included the material spoils of war in his haul. Remember James chapter 4. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but you do not have, so you kill. Desires can include ambition to be the top of an organization. Greed causes wars, but lust for absolute power is also involved in Genesis chapter 14. Towards the end of the reading, the king of Sodom was quite happy for Abraham to have the spoils of war, as long as he had the persons. That's verse 21. Wars are often about ideology, the control of minds. Sometimes wars are about the control of conscience, hence religious wars. Ordinary people suffer in destructive power politics, just like Lot. The world of today, although technically advanced, is not too different from the world of Lot's day. The 21st century has its tyrants, just like the 20th century. You all live in the world and you recognize the truth of what I'm saying. But is the world in you? Are you greedy for power and influence, and you don't care what impact you have on others? This is the mindset of the world. The world lusts over power just as it lusts over riches. The Apostle John commented in his first letter, "If anyone loves the world, love for the Father," that's God, "is not in them. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, comes not from the Father, but from the world." John wasn't writing to people of the world. He was writing to warn people in the church who had the world living in them. Pagans were hardly likely to read John's letter. Professing Christians would, might. So, do you see yourself as being a mini power lord, or driven by various lusts? What is the effect of those things on others? Lot suffered spiritually in Sodom. He was unlikely to be more comfortable as a prisoner of Chedorlaomer. Not for the last time, Lot was removed from Sodom, where he lived. He was distressed there, but he was wedded to it. We have a saying about going out of the frying pot and into the fire. Lot now needed to be rescued from the fire. In Genesis chapter 14, verse 13, we read this: "A man who had escaped from Sodom came and reported the abduction of Lot to Abram the Hebrew. Now Abram was living near the great trees of Mamre the Amorite, a brother of Eshcol and Aner, all of whom were allied with Abram. When Abraham heard that his relative had been taken captive, he called out the 318 trained men born in his household and went in pursuit as far as Dan." Was he crazy? Only 318 against an army that had proved invincible against that of 5 kings on their own turf. Abraham's cause was good. He'd already shown himself to be a generous spirit towards his nephew in allowing Lot to choose where he wanted to live. But Abram only had a number of men that could be counted to the nearest person. Against an army of 4 kings. This was hardly making a rational decision. Lot was his nephew and a fellow believer. Remember what Jesus said, "This is love, that a man lay down his life for his friends." Abram was driven by the Spirit of Christ. He risked all to save Lot. At times, Abram's faith had wavered, but on this occasion it was massive, and we can only marvel at our own little faith in comparison to that of Abram. Our little faith in much smaller circumstances, much smaller trials. Abram's trial was immense. Was there another consideration? Yes. Notice that Abram knew the Lord for who he was. Notice his confession of God in verse 22. Abram worshipped God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. Some decades ago, a book was published to encourage and challenge its readers. The book was entitled, "Your God is Too Small." Children sing a chorus. My God is a great big God. Is our problem that we don't know the greatness of God? Perhaps another factor was that Abram was not alone in his worship of God Most High. In chapter 13 and verse 18, it's recorded that Abram had openly built an altar to the Lord by the oaks of Mamre at Hebron, not far from Jerusalem, called Salem at the time. Later in the chapter, we're introduced to the king of Salem. This king, Melchizedek, was also a worshipper of God Most High. They must have known of each other's presence in the area. The worshippers of the Most High God must have stood out in the pagan darkness of the Amorites. Did Abram receive encouragement from Melchizedek? We should encourage one another and pray for one another. Abram, the man of faith, rose to the challenge. His faith was active. In Hebrews chapter 11, the author pointed out the faith manifested by people in the past. He wrote of conquering kingdoms through faith. He wrote of those who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Jesus encouraged those with little faith. He told his disciples that faith as small as a mustard seed can remove mountains. It's not the strength of our faith that's important, it's the greatness of our God. He is God Most High. Abram went and caught up the army of Kedorlaomer and at Dan, right in the north of what eventually became the land promised to his descendants. He attacked with devastating tactics in verse 15. During the night, Abram divided his men to attack them, and he routed them, pursuing them as far as Horeb, north of Damascus. Now, he was a man of faith, but he also used his mind in devising those tactics. His planning was brilliant. In verse 16, he recovered all the goods and brought back his relative Lot and his possessions, together with the women and the other people. Mission accomplished. As noticed, and he was greeted by two contrasting kings. One of these was the humiliated but relieved king of Sodom. We shall look at his response first. In verse 21, he said to Abram, "Give me the people and keep the goods for yourself." Does this seem a suitable, generous response of gratitude? Generally speaking, we would regard valuing life much more than riches as being commendable. However, he probably loved power over people as being of supreme importance. The economy of Sodom had been strong, as the valley of Siddim had been recognized by Lot as being very fertile at the time. The economy would pick up, but it needed people. He was possibly also anxious to have an army to defend himself in case Cadorlaomer attacked again. Anyway, his motives were unclear. But Abram was very clear and very decisive. In verse 23, "I will accept nothing belonging to you, not even a thread or a strap of a sandal, so that you will never be able to say, 'I have made Abram rich.'" The king of Sodom was ruler of a very wicked city. Abram served the Lord, God Most High, and he didn't want to be known as being dependent upon this most evil of men, or drawn into his net. He might have sounded rude, and might have felt that he'd offended the king of Sodom, but he was determined not to be drawn into alliances with him. Many hundreds of years later, the Apostle Paul warned the church at Corinth in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14, "Do not be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness?" We need to choose our friends carefully. Now, Abram had a completely different relationship with Melchizedek, the king of Salem. He too met with Abram in the valley of Shaveh, that's the King's Valley. Salem contrasted strongly with Sodom and its king. Hebrews chapter 7 tells us that Salem's king was both a king of righteousness and a king of peace. He was also priest of God Most High. In verse 19, he blessed Abram, saying, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hands." Why did they celebrate together with bread and wine? We can imagine that they met with thankfulness. Abram had been kept safe, and Lot had been rescued from captivity. There's a lot there to be thankful for answered prayers. Abram gave Melchizedek a tenth of everything, recognizing him as being greater than himself. The writer to Hebrews chapter 7 verse 1 wrote, "Melchizedek was king of Salem and priest of the Most High." He met Abram, returning from the defeat of the kings, and blessed him, and Abram gave him a tenth of everything. First, the name Melchizedek means king of righteousness, then also king of Salem means king of peace. Without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days and end of life, resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. Just think how great he was. Even the great patriarch Abram gave him a tenth of the plunder. Hebrews chapter 7, verse 7 comments, without doubt, the lesser is blessed by the greater. Melchizedek resembled Jesus, the Son of God. He foreshadowed the great high priest, an exalted king that looks after us. Abraham's mission of salvation, mission of deliverance, was blessed by God Most High through the prayers of that priest representing his interests. But there were greater issues at stake than just the deliverance of Lot. What if Abram failed? What if he'd been killed in battle? Remember the promise to Abram in Genesis chapter 12, verse 4. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all people on earth will be blessed through you. Melchizedek, king of Salem's prayers, has eternal and universal significance. God had chosen Abram as the channel of grace to the nations. His descendant Jesus was to be the saviour of lost, fallen, and hopeless people from all over the world. They were under the tyranny, not just of men like the king of Sodom and Chedorlaomer, but the devil himself. Something much greater than the deliverance of Lot was taking place. Why was it so important that Abram be protected? Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14 tells us, since the children have flesh and blood, Jesus too shared in their humanity so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is, the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. Abram delivered Lot, but Jesus, his descendant, delivers all those held in slavery by fear of death, those that trust in him. Our present crisis is a test of our faith, is it not? Does it find us fearful of death? How are you getting on? In Luke chapter 15, Jesus portrayed himself as a shepherd who came to save a lost sheep. When he recovered the lost sheep, the shepherd gathered his neighbors and asked them to rejoice with him. Now you can see something of that atmosphere in the celebration meal of Melchizedek and Abram, as they doubtlessly rejoiced in the deliverance of Lot. Now, we're not sheep, and we're not captives of a worldly king like Chedorlaomer, or even the king of Sodom. But the Bible does speak about us being captives of sin and fear and death. Has Jesus rescued you from those things? There is joy in heaven over one sinner that repents. Is your trust in Jesus, a risen, exalted King? one who lives forever and is greater than either Abram or Melchizedek. Melchizedek was the friend of Abram, the man of faith. Is Jesus your friend? Let's close by singing that great hymn, I have a friend whose faithful love is more than all the world to me. Let's sing that hymn.